break, so we could finish up on healthcare, and then I do think that Nick and I are going to have a disagreement. I was talking to him over the break. We might have a slight one. I don't. It's not going to be a big difference, but yeah, on healthcare, I mean, that's basically what I have to say about it. I think, unfortunately, I mean, we could talk about it next week. Hopefully, the Democrats find a spine. I mean, they should have a spare one now that Paul Ryan has given up his. But yeah, I don't have much confidence, and I think it's going to be devastating for the country. But we'll see. That's my last thoughts on healthcare. So, do you have any last thoughts on healthcare, or should we move on to the discussion about the Washington football team? I don't. What do you call them?
I call them Washington. I call them the Washington racial slurs. I can't take credit for it, but that is the term I've heard. That's the term I stick with. In terms of healthcare, honestly, I think this is just, once again, it is making this a state's issue. I think is the inherent flaw with an entitlement program. Like, if Republicans had their way right now, they'd go ahead and say about Social Security, yeah, states can do whatever they want with that. We don't need to have we don't need to have this as a federal budget and blah, blah, blah. Like, okay, fine, that's great, but then you will watch individual states, at least with this healthcare bill, just tumble and absolutely just watch their budgets implode. I mean, we've talked about Illinois before that can't even get a budget passed, period. So bad enough for education, that's a problem. Now you're going to throw on healthcare into that budget crisis. Good luck with that. And in Kansas, where they don't want to raise taxes for anything, there will be no money for healthcare. And again, that language I read from the NPR articles is funny because on the surface, yes, insurance companies can't say no, or they can't deny based on pre-existing conditions until the state says, we want to change the definition of those essential healthcare coverages. And therefore, that's what you're going to get. And by the way, the other thing to remember about this is a fairly conservative state is not going to look at some of the healthcare issues of women as being essential. And that's when you're going to start to see some changes when it comes to women's health and the lack of coverage there, because some states are just run by just bigots and just complete assholes and are not going to consider women's health issues to warrant as essential coverage. Things like mammograms, for example, or pap smears, and just medical checkups like that just go by the wayside because those are all seen as cosmetic or something even less important. But that's what happens when you give this over to the states. Classic example is voting. If we're going to be honest with ourselves, yeah, once in 2011 the Supreme Court decided to put the voting rights or let states have more of a say in voting. Within minutes, 11 states came forward with voter ID laws. You will see some version of that with healthcare. And saying all that, I will shut up there.
But actually, before you brought up a point that I did one last thing that I do want to touch on, which in terms of healthcare, which is that there have been a couple of states. Nevada passed a single payer for all bill in their House and Senate, and I think it was vetoed by the governor. I think that there is also one pending in California, a Medicare for all kind of thing. But here's the problem, and I think there was another state, Vermont might have done it and had it rejected ultimately. But because here's the problem, is that there is not enough statewide financial power to be able to afford it, because you're talking about, at least for the state of California, I think it was going to be funded by a 15% payroll tax, which is enormous. Whereas if you spread that out across the country, it's not the tax would not be so significant. Now, granted, I mean, and when you get into any discussion about Medicare for all, the idea is that, yes, the tax burden will go up. However, the overall cost will be down, so you will have more money in your pocket anyway. But you're seeing the states even try to do stuff like this, but there's just not enough power to do it because of the populations and to be able to afford it, and because of the tax base. So that's another reason why this can't be. It really just can't be done on a state-by-state basis. It just doesn't work that way. And I think that your point about the Voting Rights Act is and how they've gutted it is a prime example of another kind of area where states' rights can be a problem, and how certain states, many of them, oftentimes abuse it. But yes, now we can get to the next point.
So as we wrap up today, Dave and I, most recent bit of news. I'll just read this as a headline from the Washington Post. Supreme Court rejecting trademarks that quote unquote disparage others violates the First Amendment. So in short, and this specifically is, a good example of this is the Washington football team. Obviously known as the Redskins, and a term I don't use because it was offensive, and it's just blatantly racist. So the opening paragraph from the article reads, "The federal government has violated the First Amendment by refusing to register trademarks that officials consider disparaging. The Supreme Court ruled unanimously." That's important to note, unanimously. Monday, in a decision that provides a boost to the Washington racial slurs efforts, in the article reads Redskins, of course, efforts to hang on to the team's controversial name. Now, obviously, the Washington Post looks at this as a local story when it comes to the National Football Team. The interesting part to this, too, is this also was partly brought up because of a rock group from the article. The ruling came in a case that involved an Asian American rock group called the Slants, which tried to register the band's name in 2011. The band was turned down by the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office because of a law against registering trademarks that are likely to disparage people or groups. So the question for Dave and I to explore now is this from a First Amendment rights issue? How do we both feel about this ruling? So, Dave, I will let you go first.
So I hate talking about this anyway. I mean, here I'm a white bald man. People are going to think I'm a Nazi or anything. Although I have to say that I actually, this is my lawyerly mind analyzing this kind of stuff, which is the way that I analyze any kind of free speech thing. Now I think ultimately, I think that it would just be good business for the Washington football team to change their name. I think it would be good business in terms of just publicity. I think it would be good business in being able to sell a whole bunch of new jerseys and a whole new logo and all of those other things. But that, and I have no problem with people having problems with the name or protesting the name or anything else like that. I think that they I think that they should. So I want to make sure that people understand that I'm not making a value judgment on the protests of it, especially when it comes to the team itself. I mean, look, I remember when I was a kid, what do you call it? St. John's, the basketball team in our area. Their team was called the Red Men. They changed it to the Red Storm. The interesting thing about that was that I don't necessarily think that was intended originally to, or obviously I mean, I don't know. I don't know how the Redskins name is not intended to disparage Native American, but whatever. But I mean, I think the Redmen title for St. John's. I mean, because if you look in upstate New York, there's the Orange Men. I really, honestly think that it was originally. I don't think that they were trying to disparage Trumps. I think that it was. I think that it was designed just. Let's pick a random color. And then call us this team. So I think the same kind of thing happened with St. John's there, but they just said, all right, we're not gonna, all right, it's controversial. We'll change the name, we'll change the jersey, we'll be the Red Storm. I think something similar. I think that I think the Washington football team could easily be the Hogs or the Pigskins. I heard was a good name. There's a million of other things that I think that they could do, business wise, that would make sense. But when you get the government involved, and this is how I look at anything from a legal standpoint, when you are involved in these First Amendment cases, particularly when they involve the government, is that it has to be content neutral. It just has to be, because otherwise you are absolutely curbing free speech. You don't have to like the speech, that's not the point of this country, and and you could get into a greater political argument about whether or not it's wise, because I honestly think that part of the reason why Donald Trump has some appeal is because people look. One of the things about the American foundation is people, rightly so, love free speech, and they defend it to all ends. And when they feel it's under attack, they react viscerally. And I think one of the things that Donald Trump tapped into more than anything else, and here's the problem when you get into any conversations of this of anything like this, is that these are very nuanced conversations, and too often when somebody speaks in favor of free speech, I've seen this happen, but when somebody speaks in favor of free speech on such a controversial issue, a lot of times people on the fringes, particularly the right fringe, think, oh, well, I like this guy, or it's usually a guy, but I like this guy because he's supporting the underlying thing that, yeah, racism is great. And it's like, no, don't think that. I still think it's horrible. I just understand that the First Amendment is, it has to be content neutral when it comes to these kinds of things. When it involves the government. When you get into private entities, it is a different discussion. It is a different calculus to make. I mean, this is why, there are, like the thing with Kurt Schilling, I actually kind of came out in favor of ESPN on that one, only because it was the second time, because a company has to be able to regulate its employees. So I mean, these are very, like I said, these are very nuanced conversations. But understand that I always come from the perspective of you should do the right thing, but ultimately it's not the government's place to tell you what the right thing is. They have to be a neutral arbiter, and they have to say, I don't. This is your speech. You can say it, and yes, you can call your Asian band the Slants, which is, I mean, I get the, it's just offensive. I understand it. It's terrible. And you can call your football team the Redskins, and you can do all of these. You can legally do all of these horrible, offensive things under the Constitution. But you shouldn't. Is not. I mean, you shouldn't. I'm saying removed from that. You shouldn't as a human being, but as a government, as a court, as a country, we have to allow it. We have to allow it because otherwise it's going to come, someday it's going to be your kind of speech. It's going to be your issue that you are talking about that's unpopular. I mean, my God, on this program, the stuff that we say is probably very unpopular amongst a certain segment that would love to shut us down. And if they had the ability to do that through the government, that would be awful. I'm the person that doesn't believe in shutting down free speech, even if I don't like it, and particularly if I don't like it. And this is one of those cases. I don't like it, but I think it's stupid business, and all of those other things. But I do believe that it has to be content neutral, and I do think that the court absolutely made the right decision here. Anyway, your counter.
Sure. Well, the first thing that's funny about this is that the Slants is an Asian American group. This is a collection of Asian Americans that are using a racial epithet for their band. It's not a collection of people from another ethnicity that are that wanted to be offensive and do this. There's a certain level of, I guess, irony, or I don't know what you quite call that, but it is quite humorous that a group is deciding to own a term that has been used against them, right? And we actually kind of just saw this whole discussion on Bill Maher's program about the use of the N-word and how a few African Americans came on the show and spoke about their discomfort with white people using that term, or anyone who isn't black, I guess. Where I think this gets a little tricky is when I think of terrorism. Because if an alt-right group, or neo-Nazis, which is what they really are, decides to go ahead and open up a school and call it the Adolf Hitler School for Gifted and Talented, under the Supreme Court's ruling, that would technically be allowed. And with the rise of neo-Nazism in this country, and make no mistake about it, we are seeing a return to fascism in the form of people that are in absolutely embracing their racism these days. Um, I'm waiting for that to happen next. I'm waiting for like the Milo Yiannopoulos and the Ann Coulters and all these just fringe lunatics that want to go ahead and push the boundaries and say, well, we have free speech, we can say whatever we want. We're going to go ahead and call our school this because there is an alt-right section that does believe that that the Nazis may have gotten a bad rap. My question is, had that been the case, does the court rule this way? I'm curious about that because I've always felt that when it comes to matters of racism, we are very selective about that. Because, for example, when we use the term Redskin, there is a level of social acceptance about it because it's referring to a group of people that essentially have been decimated and wiped off the planet. Go ahead and take the Washington D.C. basketball, or the Washington basketball team, and call them the Washington D.C. N-words, and I think we're going to have a whole different conversation about it. So my issue with this is that there is a level of hypocrisy in that. At the same time, as we are much more likely now to be concerned about terrorism, we have taken terrorism through the Patriot Act and actually have connected that to free speech. So if you were to try to go ahead and open up the Osama bin Laden School of International Studies or something, I would imagine you'd get shut down. And I'd be curious if this ruling applies to that because, you know, the reference to bin Laden or to someone like Hitler, these are symbols of terrorism. And it seems like in our nation's recent history, we've put laws in place to shut those types of things down. But the court's ruling here would open the door to those two things. And I'm very curious to see if an organization is going to take this step further and go ahead and really test this out. I'm simply curious about it. I guess I'm talking in circles to some extent because I do believe in the First Amendment, and I do believe that no matter how offensive the speech is, you do have a right to say it because I think to not is, or to have the government take it away from you, is the most un-American thing that possibly can happen to someone. And it is one of the things that we value in this country is the right to say effectively whatever you want, and the government doesn't have the right to get involved. My bitterness with all this is the simple fact that there is a level of hypocrisy to this. And had it not been the slants but some other racial epithet used, are we having the same conversation? Is the court going to back away from it and view this from the lens of terrorism? But I do agree that worrying about trademark infringements or worrying about trademarks being considered offensive is not necessarily a reason to shut something down. Because if that's the case, then Pussy Riot, had that band been formed in the U.S., may have been seen as such, I guess. So in short, what I would say is I think this is just, there's a level of hypocrisy behind all this that's hard to ignore. And I'm very curious to see this get tested. I do also argue that the market should kind of correct itself in this case as well. If you are offended by, say, the Adolf Hitler School for Gifted and Talented, well, you wouldn't send your kid there. And probably most people wouldn't for fear of social stigmatization, so the school inevitably would fail, so we think. Now, the Washington team is funny because the Redskins illustrate a certain level of acceptance we have when it comes to racism, especially in the nation's capital. Because from a privacy standpoint, from a private company standpoint, the National Football League, like most professional sports organizations, which completely is not governed by antitrust legislation, could step in and tell Washington, tell Daniel Snyder that he needs to change the name of the team. Goodell won't, because Goodell is a scumbag. And the league as a whole is okay with this offensive term. Again, I ask you, if we are targeting another ethnicity and using a racial slur, is the private company that is the NFL going to be more vigilant about stopping it? I'd argue yes. So in short, I understand the court's opinion. I do sympathize with it. I am of the mindset that this may well get tested, and I'd be curious to see if the court will stay unanimous in their decision, or if some kind of trademark is so heinous that it will not be allowed to be used.
I mean, I actually, so in terms of if it was something if it was another group name, I do think that it would probably be just out of the reality. I think that the NFL would take it differently. I mean, look at how the NBA reacted to Donald Sterling's comments. I mean, granted, it's a different league, but yes, it was handled very differently, and I think that it would be handled very differently from the private company, standpoint of the NFL. I also would love to have a conversation about which of the four commissioners we hate the most. Although I don't really have an opinion. Well, I'm starting to develop an opinion on the Major League Baseball commissioner, with his no longer intentional walks kind of thing. But anyway, but I still hate Bettman more than all of them. I know that you hate Goodell probably more than anyone. But it would be an interesting conversation. But anyway,
I don't know about that. I think Bettman is the reason that hockey is not the prominent fourth sport it could be. The salary cap for the National Hockey League, I think, just got to $75 million. Just got to $75 million. No, that's a worthwhile discussion. I mean, Dave and I have done a center-specific podcast in terms of our friends from college, and that certainly would be a show for there. But yeah, I may debate you on that about worst commissioner.
Yeah, it would be an interesting conversation. But in terms of so that's in terms of the private organization. I think that it would be different. But my position remains the same, and I hate But this is as a a card-carrying member of the ACLU. I'm the person who would support it across. I would. Because I believe in the principle, I would have to support the Adolf, whatever the school for whatever. I mean, I wouldn't want to go there. I think it would be horrible. I think it would be horrible to have it. I wish that, but the consistency says that, you have to let it be. Whether or not you should draft anybody from that to be a lineman, I think is a different story. I mean, I don't, but
you imagine like Piper and the guys at the end of the draft. So this guy's coming out of the Hitler school. It's 6 feet tall. His hand speed's good. He's got good sized hands, and like that Hitler school keeps producing NFL talent.
Yeah. I would say that it would probably have I think that graduating from that school might have detrimental career effects. So I would but like I said, the courts themselves, have to stay neutral. So as odious as it is, yes, you do have to. I just feel that you have to support it. I just think it would be bad. The more interesting thing would actually, if they really want to start testing this kind of stuff, and I shouldn't give them any ideas, but more than the NFL or the NBA or the NHL or any of those, test it out on the NCAA. Try to get because that's a quasi. Because they're an interesting. First of all, I hate the NCAA anyway. But their relationship specifically with like public universities and whatnot, it's really interesting. How it would be affected by it, and whether or not they would have to allow them into one of their collegiate divisions. It would be an interesting test case there, which overlaps on certain, government and private things. I mean, granted, the NCAA is still a private organization. I don't know. I'm trying to think of like a state. I mean, because and this is the thing in the law. I mean, it's constitutional law 101. I mean, you need state action, and once state action is involved, it becomes a totally different discussion than with a private entity. And I agree. This is also why I'm a regulated capitalist, because I believe that the market would correct those kind of things, and I think that it would correct it harshly. So there's, but that's the difference between arguing with the legal principle and the moral principle, of which I think that there's a pretty bright line moral principle there. But who knows? Trump is our president. Who knows? I'm still waiting for him to change the Orange Men, to go after them. Syracuse, he's coming for you because it'll be the orange storm soon. All right, well, I think that's all that we have. That's all I have for this. Any other topics? Anything else that you want to cover before we go, or even on this? Do you want to comment any further? I will give you the last word on this debate.
I would say I will be very curious to see who tries to take this further. I am very much a proponent of waiting for some alt-right organization to try something crazy enough. I mean, God knows they do it enough as it is now. So, I mean, people are flying the Nazi flag again anyway. So, who knows? That school may open after all. If it does, I would feel horrible that I even was responsible for possibly inspiring it. So, but that's it for me.
Yeah, that's it for me too. Also, we want to make sure that don't open up any kind of schools like that. We are advocating to not do anything like that. Please don't. It would be horrible. So yes, I don't want to put any idea. What?
Especially because Hitler was neither gifted nor talented, which is how the whole thing started in the first place.
I know. Yeah. I don't even want to venture into an accidental bad Hitler joke that will be horribly offensive. I just don't even want to touch it anymore. I hate these subjects because it's like, I'm not trying to be offensive. Occasionally I'm trying to be funny. What?
The Supreme Court would back us up.
They would. That's why I support this kind of stuff. Just in case I accidentally, even unintentionally, venture into that. I mean, I probably will be hated just for the linebacker comment alone. Anyway, but it's damn funny. But it's not meant to be offensive in any way. I hear you get out as Bill Burr says, get out the podium. I'm ready to apologize. Whatever. I know the system has to eat me up for saying anything. Anyway, fun way to end the show. Anyway, all right. Well, that's it for this week. Probably for forever. No, I'm kidding. We will be back next week because we don't have sponsors that can get rid of us.
Right, exactly.
I know. We barely have viewers. So, anyway. But we need more. So make sure to subscribe to the show on this YouTube channel. You can catch us out on Patreon, www.patreon.com/GenerationPolitX, POLITX. You can follow us on Twitter at GenPolitX, at GenPolitX. If you want to email us your disgust with us from this week's episode, even though it's undeserved, you can email us at GenerationPolitX, the full word for that one, at gmail.com. Otherwise, yeah, we will be back next week with more. So have a good week, everybody. See you next time. Do you like liking things like this video? Well, if so, why don't you like it and subscribe?